Hello guys, Nigel here with you again, and here we are now with part 7 of this build. And if you remember, part 6 wasn't so special, was it? So this is actually the second time I'm recording this. I tried to record this morning before I did the work that I've just done, and the thunder and lightning was just unbearable and the dog was barking and everything. It was just crazy. So recording this now sort of out of sync really. So basically, yeah, where we were yesterday, where I left you, the noise I had, the clonking noise, after a phone call with Tim, the mate of mine who's a professional engine builder, sort of deduced from a process of elimination basically that it was basically piston slap. Now really, before I built this engine, I should have measured pistons and ring gaps and all that, but I didn't, because this engine wasn't stripped down, as I've said before. It wasn't stripped down because it had a problem, it was stripped down because it had oil leaks, and because I found that everything else was in such a mess. And I'm glad I did, because I found swarf and everything in it. So basically I just put it together because it didn't have any rattles, it didn't have any knocks, it didn't burn an oil, it went absolutely fine, it didn't smoke. So, you know, I just assumed stupidly that everything was going to be okay. Well, as it turns out, these pistons have got quite a taper on them. Now, pistons are normally smaller on the top than they are on the bottom. That's because the top gets hotter, obviously, than the bottom of the piston obviously does. So, but these are quite ridiculous. So if I turn the engine over and try to get a feeler gauge in the gap between the skirt and the piston wall, I can't get a 2 thou feeler gauge in there. So, sorry, I can't get a 1.5 thou feeler gauge in there. So, you know, you can tell it's pretty tight clearance. Spec is 005 to 007, so that's like 2 to 3 thou, 2 to 3.5 thou. So yeah, the fact that I can't get a 1.5 in there is because obviously the piston's on a curve and my feeler gauge is flat, so it would have to bend into the shape to go in. So it tells me that it's all good. I also know there's no wear on the pistons because the coating on the sides on the skirts wasn't at all worn. So if the pistons were worn from rubbing on the bores, then basically the first thing to go would be the coating, and you'd see bright patches on the pistons, and there was none. I don't know if you remember seeing that when we did the rings and everything. So no wear whatsoever. Bores were absolutely fine. I did put a honing stone very quickly through them, just to check, because you can see then if you've got any high and low spots, and they're absolutely perfect. Often the bores will actually go like an old beer glass. We used to get a straight beer glass and it came down and it went out like this, and then it came down again and tapered in. So that's the sort of shape you would get. You get it straight at the top because nothing's touching the top above the top rings, and then it sort of comes down straight and then it goes out and then tapers back in and straight again at the bottom. So that's what you're looking for if you're looking for wear in your bores. No good measuring just the top. You need to measure like 3 positions down the bore. As I say, no issues with this one, so absolutely fine. If I'd honed it and I'd found high and low spots, then I would have got the block up to Tim's place and measured it all up. But there was nothing, so not really worried about it. So it turns out the knocking noise was actually the pistons, and to try and show you, I use my dirty old thinners covered SKF mug. It's not dirty coffee, this is actually where I've splashed thinners on it and it's dissolved the plastic and marked it. So basically, if you can imagine, this mug is the piston and my fingers are the pivot for the, well, my fingers here are the pivot for the com rod, so my arm's going to be the com rod. If you remember, I said I had no noise at top and bottom dead centre. That's because the com rod is directly below and it's pulling it up and down, so it's not doing anything. But if you can imagine, if the piston is tapered, so it's sort of touching the bore here, but up here at the top it's got plenty of rock. When you come to the side, when you pull the piston down the bore, okay, the resistance is in the rings, it's going to tip the piston over. So, yeah, it's going to, and then when you let it go again, the rings are going to let it spring back. And then when you push the other way, it's going to push it. So that's what it is, it's just the piston. And it was amazing, once I got it off the table and onto the stand, I couldn't really hear it, especially from the top. If I turned the engine over, I could just about hear it. So then the cardboard, the aluminium ladder frame, the actual table it stood on is just echoing and making things sound a lot worse. So anyway, that's sorted now. So I haven't actually restripped any bearings or anything. I just basically spent a couple of hours listening to it, trying to ascertain. Another way to find noise is if you get a large screwdriver, something like this one here, get a large screwdriver with a nice plastic end on it, you can stick that in your ear and then put the end wherever you think the problem might be. and you can turn it, and you'll hear if you've got a knock and it's from one of the cylinders, you can turn the flywheel and you'll hear, when it comes to it, you'll hear the knock. But I couldn't even hear the knock through a screwdriver. So, you know, I've done it before on running engines with the rocker cover off on old engines, overhead valve, and actually put a screwdriver on, and you can hear, and you'll hear where there's a rattle, where it's coming from, and it's a really good thing. Health and safety wise, it's a no-no, so don't tell anybody I told you to do it. But it's a very good way to find noises. So basically, yeah, when I recorded this morning, I was going to get it all back together, get back to where we were yesterday with the flywheel on and the seal on, and then we'll go on and start finding top dead center and stuff. So I've done that already. I've also made a pointer so we can do the top dead center. So I'm going to show you now how to find top dead center using a clock, but I'll also explain how to do it without one. It's basically the same. Because this engine has no timing marks, you have to make your own timing marks, and then you set the crank position sensor in time, which locates into a peg in the flywheel, and then that is your top dead center sorted, and that's it. So you can actually get to that when it's in the Land Rover. It's got a cover over it. If you look under the bonnet of your Land Rover, if you've got a 2.4, just behind the turbo where the downpipe goes down, where the bell housing meets the block, you will see down in there underneath your clutch pedal sort of thing, there's like one of these corrugated tin covers. That's a heat shield. Pull that off and you'll see that under there is your crank position sensor, and you can take the crank position sensor out. Don't take the bracket off because that's your timing, and then you can go down in there and find top dead center. Or that's actually 50 degrees before top dead center, so you've got to do some calculations. So yeah, anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and I'll show you what I'm doing now. So that's basically it. A couple of points have been raised. One was Gary said, could I change the colour of my coat, because when I sit in front of the Mustang I just turn into a head. No. And the other one is Stephen was asking about on those ladder bracket gaskets, I put silicone in the grooves, and asking why I did that. I did explain when I made the video, the bottom of my block has been milled way too high a feed rate with a blunt milling cutter, and it's like a ploughed field. So the reason I put the silicone in that groove, and only in that groove, was just so that it could fill in as it goes along. It's almost like a castellation, like that, the surface. So where that cutout is, where it's high, it'll be crushing the cutout, and where it's low, the cutout won't be flexible enough to go in and get the corners. So if you can imagine, if you've got this kind of thing and you've got something rigid over the top, it'll flex in the middle and go into it, but it won't get into these corners. So that's why I put silicone in it, just so when I clamp it down, it just goes in and it fills in all the undulations, because it was leaking there before. So because there's a couple of oil pressure points in there, and obviously if you've got a finish like a ploughed field, you know, it's very much like my carriage door you can see here, and your gaskets there, it's a metal gasket, it can't, you know, deal with that much conformity. So basically I put a bit of silicone on there just to help. So it was only a very small amount, very small amount. So there we go, it's all back together now, seals on, flywheels on, made a pointer, and we're ready to do top dead center. So let's get to the engine and start doing some stuff. So I'll see you there. Alright, so we can see here that the flywheel is on now. I've made up this pointer. It's basically just a piece of turn nylon, a little tin pointer on the end, and an M10 bolt, so that can stay in there, and all is good. So that can probably stay in there until the build's completed, because the actual engine stand, I think, will pick up off of these two here, I think, I can't from memory. So there we go. Or does it pick up from there? I can't remember now, but we'll get around it. It may not need to even stay on there, as long as I leave the mark, I'm fine. So yeah, basically made the pointer, got the flywheel on. I did use the new seal, because I remember I had two seals. I had one from Loft and I had one from Victor Rhines in the gasket set. They're about £15 to replace, and I did actually nick the old one when I took it out. It was the tiniest of marks. I thought, I'm not going to chance it for 15 quid. Having to take all this out again is just not worth it. So I did actually put another new seal on with the new, you know, the new plastic ring and everything that goes with it. So that's that. So what we're going to do now is find top dead centre. We can turn the engine over. There's our clunk still there, you see there's a piston clunk. So we can turn the engine over, and what we're going to do is find top dead centre, and I'm going to show you first of all how to do it with a clock, and then I'll explain how to do it with a metal block. So let me move the camera and then we'll get onto that. Okay, so what we can see here, this is number 1 piston, roughly near the top of the cylinder, and you could think to yourself, okay, so that's top dead centre. You could put a clock on there, like here I've got a mag base, okay, and what you could do is come along with your mag base, chuck it onto the block, get your clock. I need to get this around so you can see the clock, don't I? It's no good enough so that only I can see it. So we're going to get the clock down here. This is not going to be easy. These monkey things are awful. They're called monkeys, and they are, on the cheap ones like this is the cheap and nasty junk, they are bloody awful. So what you could do is get your clock set up like this, okay? Get up so you can see the face. Alright, so we've got the clock there, and now you can see the face, can't you? Move the camera around so you can see it a bit better. Here we go. Okay, so what I can do is just turn the flywheel, and I can say, right, come up to there. Alright, so that's top dead centre there. That's the highest point, but it's not accurate enough. There is a point on the crankshaft, obviously, as it comes up over centre, there's going to be quite a wide point where the clock's going to be reading 0. So the best way to do it is actually, as the manual tells you to do it, is to come along and set the piston, you know, roughly 10 millimeters or whatever below the oh, come on, undo, below the top. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is make sure your clock is actually reading something. Make sure you're not just reading nothing. Okay, so first check your number of turns, so it's the first time it comes to 0. Alright, so what I can do now is come back and then come up to 0, just like so. Okay, so there I am at 0. So now I can come around the back and make a mark. So I'll turn the camera off, I'll show you making me a mark, and then I'll come back and show you what we do again. Okay, so I've got the camera moved around now, so you can see I've got the pointer here, and I'm going to use my old depth gauge as a kind of square, if you like. I've got it set a bit too deep there, it's catching on the flywheel, on the ring gear. So just put this against here, I can use that as a square, and then I can mark a line, just like so, using a pencil. Sharpie would leave a very fat mark, and I don't really want that. So there we go, so that's that line on there. I don't know if you can see it, but it is there. There you go, you can just see the pencil line there. So what we'll do now is we'll go back over here. Okay, so we established that 0. Okay, going anti-clockwise, so here I'm turning the flywheel now anti-clockwise, coming up to 0. And checking my scribe line is in the right place. Now what we've got to do is go down below centre, and then we're going to come up the other way up to the first 0. So this is now going clockwise. Oops, went past it, go back. Always, if you go past it, you have to go back. There we go. There we go. So now I can use, you need to see this again, I can use the same setting on the depth gauge and just make the pencil line. Okay, so now I've got my 2 pencil lines on the flywheel, and then what I can do is measure those, and halfway along those is top dead centre. So we'll come back round the back. Okay, so I've rigged up a bit of a better light so you can see here, and I've also just put a little Sharpie black mark so you can see what we're going for. So there's that one there, you can see that one, that line there, and then there's that line there. I can see them really easily, but unfortunately the camera isn't picking them up. Now what they tell you to do in the manual here is use a tape measure. Well, I'm afraid that is not an option. That is just not accurate enough because it won't lay flat. So what I'm going to do is get a piece of masking tape, and hopefully it will stick. And what I'm going to do is lay this piece of masking tape onto the flywheel, like so. Okay, rub that down, and then I can take my pencil and I can make a line on here. This light is making it difficult for me to see it, so what you can see I can. So I'm going to make a line there, so that's that one, and then I'm going to come round to here and make a line there, and then I'm going to take that off, put it on the bench, lay it flat and then measure it, and the line that's halfway between those two is top dead centre. Okay, so as you can see there, I've got my 3 lines. Got a line on the right there, line on the left. Measured between those, they were like 189.5, so I've gone like 95, and then transferred that line onto the flywheel. So there's my Tdci. So if I can bring that now to the pointer now, I know I'm at Tdci. I can check that on the clock, and I can see that when I go either way, if you rock around that line like that, then basically you'll see the clock rocking around. Well, walking around the clock, eh? So there we go. So now what we've got to do is take a measurement to find 50 degrees before top dead centre. Okay, so they've told us to now measure the circumference of the flywheel and then divide that by 0.1388, and that will give us 50 degrees before top dead centre. And then what we do is mark that distance to the left of the top dead centre mark, and that gives us 50 degrees before top dead centre, and then it all should all line up. So to measure the circumference, I've actually again used a piece of masking tape to save any inaccuracy. Put it around there nice and gently, not pulling it because it'll stretch, and then when we take it off, we just carefully remove the masking tape like so, and then I can lay this out on the bench and measure it. So I've measured the masking tape on the bench, being careful again not to stretch it, and it's like 923.5, 924, you can see down here. So if we go 924 times 0.1388 equals 128.25. So we've got to now draw a line 128.25 millimeters back from top dead centre, mark a line there, and that is 50 degrees before top dead centre. So I'll make another piece of masking tape with that dimension on it, and then we'll get that on the flywheel and mark it up and see how it works out. Okay, so I've got another piece of masking tape here laid on top of that one so that when I rip it off it's still sticky. So we can make a line here and use the end of the rule as a square because that's accurate enough for what we're doing. And then we need to make a line 128.25 millimeters. So just over 128. This doesn't need to be, you know, sub-micron bloody accuracy, because the so that's 128.25. So the ECU will always run the engine at its optimum settings. So here we go. So we're now going to put this on here, so I'm going to move the camera up so you can see what I'm doing hopefully. So I'm now going to line this line up on the right. I'm going to line this up with the top dead centre. So line that up with that top dead centre line there, which is difficult because it's sticky. Be careful not to stretch the tape. And then get this hooked under there so I can see where the pointer is going to go, where it's going to look at it. Be careful not to stretch the tape. Come on. When you don't want it to, when you want it to stick, it doesn't bloody stick, this stuff. So, oh my God, would you believe that? Look at that. What's the chances of that? Where I've stopped it is exactly in the right place. What's the chances of that? 360 to 1, I suppose. Right, so yeah, that is actually in the dead right spot. So that's going, I'm sure it's got to be anti-clockwise. Yeah. I'm just looking at rotate the crankshaft in the normal direction of rotation to the mark of the so it's going to be this way to the 50-degree mark. So there we go. So now we should find that when we look down in there, we've got this one elongated slot there that's going to pick up on our sensor. Right, so now that we've got the flywheel in the correct position and it's turned in the right direction, we now need to set the timing. And to do that you need a tool, and this is a tool I've made, turned it up on the lathe. If you're lucky enough to have a lathe, you have a friend who has a lathe, what I'm going to do now is measure it, and I'm going to add dimensions to this drawing here so that you can actually see it and you can make one yourself should you want to. So I'm only going to be using a digital caliper, so the accuracy isn't sort of to the nearest thou or anything. So 0 it. There we go. So that diameter there is 9.92. Let's grab my Sharpie. So that's 9.9. This diameter here is 13.98. That's 14. This diameter here was for clearance, I think, and that's 16. And then this length is 19.5, and then the length up to that shoulder there is 47.1, and then the length up to that shoulder there is 56.5. So there you go. You can have a look at that now, and you can freeze frame, make a sketch of it yourself, and that's the tool. In fact, what I'll do is I will put that there, and then look, you can freeze frame it now, and that's the tool. Okay, so that is going to be our little tool for setting up, where did the cap go, for setting up the crank position sensor. So this is the bracket. It goes onto the back of the pot. We've got two little M8 bolts that hold it in. I'm going to thread lock them because I don't want them to come loose. And what basically happens is this will slide down in here. Okay, so that locates in there, and that will slide down in there, and this end will locate in that slot I just showed you, and then we can radially adjust this. So I'll show you how it goes now. Okay, so we've got our crank position sensor, that's going to go there. Other ones have a hole down in here where the bolt goes down through. This one has a bolt through the front, but they all do basically the same thing. So I'm just going to pop a bolt in there loosely. If you wonder why I'm wearing gloves, it's because for some reason my ends of my fingers always split if I don't wear gloves, and I get oil and stuff on them, and it makes it very difficult to do modelling, scale modelling. So I keep forgetting to wear them, and I really shouldn't. So anyway, there we go. So that's, you can see now we've got all that adjustment there to set our tool with. So we can basically put that down in there, okay, and move this over till that lines up. You can see we've got a bit of play in there. That's only to be expected. So we can do this up. So if we set you can see you've got some play. If we set it so it's sort of in the middle, and then we can nip those bolts. You just see how it feels, and it's basically, it's in the middle of all the clearance and everything. So this is obviously cast, it's not a perfectly round bore, and then you've got the slot it's going into, so it's not a hole. So there we go, that is our timing done. And just as a double check, what we can do is come along here, turn back to the mark where we think the mark should be. God blimey, it doesn't want to go to the, past it. This is a nightmare. There we go. So that should just drop straight in, and it does. Okay, so that's our crank position set. So I'm going to get some thread lock on those, and then I can do them up. Okay, so for those of you that are thinking perhaps this isn't very accurate or anything, this is how modern vehicles are these days. You're kind of giving it a starting point, and then the ECU will set everything, especially with petrol engines, to the optimum. And as you can see here, the end of the crank position sensor is huge. That's sitting down in there like that. So that's going to go down in there, and then that bolt is what you set your height to. I measured this one before I took it apart, and what I did was actually set the flywheel so that it had a raised area underneath the position sensor, and it was actually a 4 thou. So what I'll do is I'll just do that again, knock it out a few degrees, put it down so it's 4 thou above. I'm not going to fit it right now in case it gets knocked off, because it is plastic. But that basically is just going to sit in there, and that will go down to the correct depth, and that will pick up. But as you can see, the diameter of that, you know, and it's picking up in slots which are about 10mm wide, 8mm wide, and it's going around so fast that it knows where it is, and then the computer adjusts for engine temperature, load, engine speed, ambient temperature, everything. It does a million calculations every millisecond sort of thing. So that is the beauty of modern engines, where they're so efficient. This is how they're getting 1,000 horsepower out of 50 cc's, you know. So there we go. So that'll be that for now. Now I've got to look at getting this back onto the engine stand, but with the flywheel in place. So I think that's going to involve some machining. Right, so here we have an engine. Here we have an engine stand. And here we have the bit that goes between. As you can see, these legs aren't long enough to reach over the flywheel and reach the block. So I made these, just turned up some lumps of alley. One's counterboard to go over the sleeve dowel there. So they should be nice and stable because they've got a nice lot of surface area. If you remember, I said about not throwing away bolts. Well, these are the old head bolts. They're M10, and one of them is, that's still full length, and that one's going to go down here because it goes through the block with the nut on the back, and then the others have been shortened because this one's a blind hole, and these holes here, sorry, I don't want it to come all the way at the back and scratch the paint, because I'm like that. So basically I've put them up in the lathe and modified them and just shortened them, and then put a big chamfer on the end so I don't have a problem getting the threads to go in if this bloody camera will focus. Come on, stupid thing. There we go. So I'll get all this assembled now and get it on there, so I'll show you how it looks when we're there. There we go, it's on there, all bolted up nice and tight. So all looking good, and we can just see the head of that bolt sticking out through there. We've got that one just sticking out through there. We got this one down in here, and we've got that one down in there with a nut on the back. So all looking good. So what we've got to do now is lift this up on the trolley and get it onto there. And there we go, guys. There's a familiar sight you've all seen many times this week. If you're wondering, just in case you're wondering, I've made these spacers extra long to clear these dowels. These dowels are hardened, and if you try and wrench them out, you could well break one off. It's just not worth chancing it because they're in blind holes. You can't knock them out from behind. So basically, if you do break one off, you're buggered, especially if it's on there. You'd have to take the flywheel off, take it to an EDM place and have it EDM'd out, electro discharge machining. There's no way you're going to drill it out because they're hard as nails. And because they're hard, they're brittle, and they may well snap. So just best not to try and, you know, don't try and lever on them, don't try and pull them out, just leave them alone, let them be. But we've got clearance there, so we can actually turn the engine over just So we've got, you know, about 3mm clearance there, so I did go to the minimum. So there we are, that's the engine back on its stand now. Next thing now is going to be getting the oil pump on. And then I think they call for you to put the sump on. Well, I can't put the sump on yet because it's not got its full coat of paint on yet, which I should have done in preparation for building the engine. But many of the engine bits and pieces aren't painted yet, so we're going to sort of halt on this very soon. Once we start getting the head on and that, once it starts talking about bracketry and stuff, I'm going to be buggered, I think, because a lot of it isn't painted. I thought it was, and it's, if you remember, I said a load of stuff was in a box and I thought it was all painted. It wasn't, it was just primed. So I need to get my ass in gear and get that done, but the weather isn't helping. You can't paint when it's really wet outside, and I can't paint in here if it's really windy, because Mr. Mustang doesn't go outside when it's windy. So there we go. Right then guys, I think that's it for today. It's, what is it, it's 7:30. You can see it's nearly 7:30. I've had enough really, been at it for quite a while. Done a little bit of modelling today, some of you will be pleased to know, but I did some spraying and then put my finger in it. Mint, and it's Mr. Hobby as well, so it's quite a thick and sticky paint, you know what I mean? It's not like Tammy where it just dries and you get a finger mark and it probably won't show. This is Mr. Hobby, so I'm probably going to leave it 2 days before I can sand it, because you know with Mr. Hobby it takes a while to dry. If you're into the modelling thing, that is scale modelling, not sort of, not this kind of modelling, not that sort of modelling, or this sort of modelling, making things, making little things, and speaking to a camera. Yeah. I think I'm losing it. So there we go. That's it for today. What have we done today? We fitted the rear oil seal, we fitted the oil pump. No, we haven't. We fitted the flywheel. Flywheel looks a bit different than the oil pump. Timed everything in, showed you how to do all that. It's all a little bit complicated, but you know, it's good to see someone doing it rather than just read it in the manual. And it's also nice to see if that manual works. I'm looking at it because the computer's there. I've also found, when I think of it, I've found a pretty big mistake in that manual. If you are building one of these, be very, very careful. When you get to the point where you're fitting the head, okay, it tells you to put number 1 at top dead center. Okay, not 50 degrees before, number 1 at top dead center. Measure the height so you can select the correct thickness of gasket. Then it goes on, put the gasket on, put the head on, put the bolts in, all the torquing sequence and everything, great. Then you're going to fit the cams in, okay, then you're going to fit the cam carriers down on and everything. Or is it a separate cam box? I can't remember now. No, it's a cam box that goes on the top. And basically they're telling you to time everything up. You've got to use 2 6mm pins, and you basically lock the cams, you lock the fuel pump, and you put all the chains on, and it tells you to put it all on with all the right marks and everything. Now there's no marking on the crank sprocket at all. There's no marking on here whatsoever, as you can see. That's what I'm pointing at, the crank sprocket. So basically you're relying on top dead center where you were. And then it tells you to tighten everything, leave all the sprockets loose, and then once all the chains in position, everything all tensioned up, then you tighten the sprockets and everything's tightened then. And then you take all the plugs out and you turn it over twice and you just check everything's okay. And one of the plugs you take out is the one at the back that I showed you the drawing for earlier, the one where we did the 50 degrees before top dead center. So nowhere do they tell you to actually put the crank at 50 degrees before top dead center, but that is where it's got to be when all of the other marks line up. So beware of that. From what I can see in the manual, that's what it looks like. So beware of that. Something to be mindful of. So it looks like when you have all the pins in, so you'll have the pin in the crank, you'll have the 2 pins in the, a pin in the fuel pump and 2 pins in the camshafts. That's all got to be, all of the pins have got to go in when it's in that situation. So obviously you may have to turn the engine over again to get the cams to go in, because cams turn at half engine speed. So you may find that you got your crank pulley and the others won't go in. You might be 180 degrees out. Just turn the crank over once more and then go from there. So it's something to be very careful of. There's something as well, when I last built a Subaru engine, it tells you to put the chain on one bank. It's a boxer. It tells you to put the chain on one bank, and then it tells you to turn it over twice. Okay, and then it tells you to turn it over once and put the other chain on. What it should be is turn it over once to check the marks, and then turn it again and put the other chain on. And it caught me out, and it really did have me going for a couple of days. I was thinking, what the hell is wrong? The engine would run, it actually would run, with one side 180 degrees out, but it was obviously fighting each side, and it just sounded like it had a god-awful misfire. And then I was actually walking over the pub one evening, it suddenly dawned on me, hang on, it should be turn one once and then turn it back to where it was, so the other one lines up, not turn it twice and then go once more. So you have to look out for these bloody manuals these days. So anyway, I'm going to bugger off now, have a beer or something, and watch a bit of YouTube, I suppose, as usual. And then I'll see you maybe tomorrow. We'll get the oil pump on, and then I don't know where we go from there. Actually, I may have to stop because I haven't got the head ready yet. We're supposed to start doing some work on the head. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.